Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are looking at a really highly targeted stack of sources.
We really are. We've got clinical guidelines on cognitive behavioral therapy from the UK's National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, plus, relationship guides from experts at Relate.
Right, and psychotherapist Julia Samuel, some insights from cosmetic surgeons, and several longitudinal studies on psychological well-being.
Yeah, it's a huge range of material.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive is to answer one highly specific, incredibly critical question, which is, how do you manage menopause-related body image shifts and self-esteem in your relationships?
Because the stakes surrounding this transition are, frankly, enormous.
They really are. I mean, in a recent survey of 1,000 women that was included in our sources, there was this staggering statistic right up front. 73% blamed menopause for the breakdown of their marriage.
Yeah, wow, 73%. That statistic just, well, it forces us to completely reevaluate the entire cultural narrative around midlife. For decades, the public conversation has just minimized this transition to like a few jokes about needing to turn a fan on at night.
Right, exactly. Like it's just hot flushes and nothing else.
But when almost 3/4 of surveyed women point to this biological shift as the actual catalyst for a divorce, I mean, it becomes undeniable that we're dealing with a really profound psychosocial event.
We really have to look at the intersection of, endocrinology, self-perception, and relational dynamics.
Yeah.
So I think we should start with the endocrinology.
The physical reality. Yeah.
Right? The reality of what happens when the body's master regulator, which is estrogen, just leaves the stage. Assuming you, our listener, already know the basic mechanics of menopause and hormone drops,
Yeah.
the sources dive into this granular cellular impact that just catches so many women completely off guard.
It really does. And one detail that stood out in the reading was the sheer velocity of collagen loss.
Yes, the collagen loss is wild.
Because, well, estrogen actually stimulates the fibroblasts that produce collagen, right? So the sudden lack of that hormone causes a 30% drop in collagen production within just the first 5 years of menopause alone.
Wait, 30% in just 5 years? That's a huge structural degradation.
It is profound. I mean, we aren't just talking about a few superficial wrinkles here. Collagen is the scaffolding of the skin, right? It's the connective tissue.
Right.
So when a third of it just vanishes that quickly, the skin loses its turgor, its elasticity, and its overall thickness.
And that is just the dermal layer. The sources detail an even more dramatic internal shift called involution, which, it fundamentally alters a woman's physical silhouette.
Yeah, involution is a major factor.
It was fascinating to read about, primarily because it's rarely discussed openly. The milk-producing glands in the breast undergo apoptosis, so they essentially just shut down and die off. And that dense glandular tissue is replaced almost entirely by adipose, or fat tissue.
Which changes the density, the shape, and the volume of the breast completely.
Completely.
And because of this localized accumulation of adipose tissue, combined with, a broader metabolic shift, the data actually shows that 1 in 5 women go up a full bra size.
Or sometimes even 2 sizes, right?
Yeah, exactly, post-menopause. And simultaneously, the lack of estrogen alters the body's fat storage instructions entirely.
Right, so instead of depositing subcutaneous fat around the hips and thighs like it used to, the body starts storing visceral fat deep within the abdomen, surrounding the organs.
Which is a totally different feeling physically.
Reading the clinical descriptions of these compounding changes, it just sounds exactly like waking up in a house you've lived in for 40 years.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. Like, every creak in the floorboards, the exact distance to every light switch in the dark. But overnight, someone sneaks in and rearranges all the furniture.
Right, and the next morning you just keep bumping into things.
Exactly. You feel entirely out of place in your own skin, navigating a geometry that just no longer makes sense.
Yeah, the internal geography has entirely shifted, even if the address is the same.
Yeah.
But the psychological impact of that rearranged house is where the data gets incredibly nuanced. There was a benchmark 2014 study published in the Health Psychology Review that attempted to isolate the actual cause of menopausal distress.
So how do they do that?
Well, they measured actual physical changes, so things like BMI increases, objective symptom severity, chronological age, and they weighed them against the women's subjective attitudes and beliefs about aging.
Wait, how do you even measure an attitude against a biological metric like BMI?
Good question. They utilized longitudinal trapping. So they had participants regularly report their levels of body shame, their internalization of media ideals, and their physical symptoms over time.
Oh, I see.
And then they ran regression analyses to see which variables best predicted psychological distress. And the findings were definitive.
What did they find?
A woman's internalized narrative about aging actually had a mathematically greater influence on her body image dissatisfaction than the physical changes recorded on the scale.
Wow, so the mindset essentially overwrote the biological reality.
Exactly. Which provides some vital context for another study we looked at from the journal Women and Health in 2016. Out of over 75,000 postmenopausal participants, 83% felt dissatisfied with their bodies.
83%. I mean, if the biology alone isn't dictating that massive wave of dissatisfaction, it has to be the gap between the expectation and the reality.
That's precisely it. We hold up the biological reality of involution and visceral fat against this culturally constructed, digitally filtered fantasy of eternal youth.
And the suffering lives in that specific gap.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
What damages our self-esteem isn't necessarily the reflection in the mirror, it's the punishing internal monologue about what we think that reflection is, supposed to look like.
Right. The cultural conditioning tells a woman she's fading, and her internal dialogue just echoes it.
Exactly.
So, since that internal narrative is the primary driver of distress, we really have to look at the psychological tools the sources recommend for rewiring it. And the literature leans heavily on the clinical application of self-compassion.
Yes, but we need to define self-compassion strictly through a clinical lens here. This is largely pioneered by researcher Kristen Neff.
Right, because this is not just a wellness buzzword.
No, not at all. It is not taking a bubble bath or repeating empty affirmations in the mirror.
Right.
In psychological terms, self-compassion is an active emotional regulation strategy. It involves recognizing your own suffering, understanding that this transition is a universal human experience rather than, a personal failure.
Yeah, the shared humanity aspect.
Exactly. And speaking to yourself with the objective kindness you would offer a good friend.
And the neurological impact of that is measurable too. The sources show that women who score high on self-compassion scales during the menopausal transition actually exhibit lower cortisol levels.
Which is huge for stress.
It is. They experience significantly less anxiety and depression. It literally buffers the central nervous system against the psychological side effects of the biological shift.
It stops the secondary layer of suffering. The biology might be uncomfortable, but the self-compassion prevents you from layering shame and panic on top of that physical discomfort.
Right. And speaking of preventing panic, the sources brought up a treatment recommendation that genuinely threw me when I first read it.
Oh, the nice EAT guidelines.
Yeah. The UK's National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which basically dictates the gold standard for medical treatments, explicitly recommends cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, for managing menopause.
It is actually one of the most robust non-pharmacological interventions available.
But I have to push back on the mechanism here.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand using CBT to manage your mood. You identify catastrophic thought, you challenge its validity, you reframe it. That changes your emotional state.
Right.
But the clinical guidelines state that CBT can reduce the impact of physical hot flushes and night sweats by up to 50%. How does a cognitive reframing exercise physically cool down a woman's core body temperature?
That's the fascinating part. We have to map out the physiological pathway of a hot flush to understand why cognitive intervention actually works.
Okay, walk me through it.
So the initial trigger is purely biological. The fluctuating hormones cause a malfunction in the hypothalamus, which is essentially the brain's thermostat.
Got it.
It falsely detects that the body is overheating and triggers a massive cooling response. That means vasodilation, where blood vessels rush to the surface of the skin and profuse sweating.
So the body thinks it's boiling, even when it isn't.
Right, the physical flush begins, but the severity and the duration of that flush depend entirely on what happens in the brain the millisecond that heat is detected. If a woman feels the flush starting in, say, a boardroom or a crowded grocery store, and her internal monologue catastrophizes, like, everyone is staring at me, I'm dripping with sweat, I look out of control, I can't cope, she inadvertently activates her amygdala.
Which is the brain's threat detection center.
Yes. The brain registers a psychological threat and triggers a fight-or-flight response. Adrenaline and cortisol just flood the system.
Oh, wow.
And what does an adrenaline spike do? It increases heart rate, heightens anxiety, and, crucially, it causes more sweating and increased body heat.
Oh, so the psychological panic literally throws physiological fuel onto the biological fire.
Exactly. It amplifies what should be a 2-minute flush into a 10-minute ordeal.
So the thought process is basically weaponizing the nervous system
Mm.
against the initial symptom. And CBT steps in to sever that specific feedback loop.
Right, by teaching specific practiced interventions. A core component of this is paced breathing, breathing slowly and deeply from the diaphragm at about 6 breaths per minute.
Just 6 breaths a minute.
Yeah. This physically stimulates the vagus nerve, which actually applies the brakes to the sympathetic nervous system. And simultaneously, the cognitive reframing kicks in.
So replacing the panic thoughts.
Exactly. The patient is trained to replace the catastrophic thought with a neutral, grounded assessment. Something like, this is a temporary vasomotor symptom. It will pass in 2 minutes. I am safe.
And deactivating the threat system like that cuts the symptom distress in half. That is incredible.
It really is.
And the sources note this is highly adaptable for sleep disruptions too, using CBTI, or CBT for insomnia.
Yes, sleep is a huge factor.
Because if a night sweat wakes you up at 3 in the morning, lying there stressing about how exhausted you will be tomorrow only ensures you stay awake.
Exactly, you're just spinning.
So CBTI utilizes stimulus control like getting out of bed if you can't sleep, so your brain doesn't associate the mattress with anxiety. Plus, relaxation techniques to lower the core temperature back down.
It is all about reclaiming agency over the nervous system.
But, that hypersensitized nervous system doesn't just switch off when you leave the bedroom or finish a breathing exercise.
No, it definitely doesn't.
If your internal threat system is constantly being tripped by physical symptoms, and your self-esteem is already fracturing because of those body image shifts we discussed earlier, that volatility inevitably spills over into your relationships.
Oh, it permeates every single interaction. Psychotherapist Julia Samuel maps this out brilliantly in the source material.
He does.
When a woman is navigating severe hormonal fluctuations and chronic sleep deprivation, her brain can become locked in a low-grade state of fight, flight, or freeze.
Which means her baseline for interpreting the world is just entirely defensive.
Right. The cognitive bias shifts toward assuming hostility. Samuel provides a really great framework for this.
Yeah, the sighing example.
Yes, a partner might simply wave a hand, make a neutral observation about dinner, or just sigh from their own fatigue.
And a calm nervous system registers that as benign background noise.
Exactly. But a hypervigilant nervous system misinterprets that sigh as criticism or rejection or a direct attack. The woman lashes out defensively or withdraws completely, leaving the partner utterly bewildered as to what just happened.
So they're like, I just sighed.
Right.
So that covers the emotional friction. But we really have to tackle the physical barrier to intimacy, which the medical sources identify as genitourinary syndrome of menopause, or GSM.
GSM is arguably the most disruptive yet least discussed physiological change. We mentioned earlier that estrogen maintains the thickness and elasticity of the skin.
Right.
Well, that applies directly to the vaginal and vulval tissues as well. When estrogen is depleted, the epithelial lining thins out dramatically, a condition known as vaginal atrophy.
So the tissue itself is changing.
Yes, the tissues lose their rugae or folds and become incredibly fragile. Furthermore, the natural production of glycogen drops, which alters the pH balance and drastically reduces natural lubrication.
And the physical consequence of that friction is dyspareunia, painful intercourse, sometimes severe pain, including actual micro tears in the tissue.
And the biological response to pain is absolute. If a specific activity reliably causes physical trauma, the brain shuts down the desire to engage in that activity.
Which makes perfect sense.
It does. The loss of libido in the context of GSM is rarely just a hormonal deficiency. It is an incredibly effective self-protective mechanism. The central nervous system is literally saying, this causes tissue damage, we will not do it.
It operates just like touching a hot stove. Your reflexes wire you to pull your hand away and avoid the burner at all costs.
Exactly.
It has nothing to do with whether you love the stove or whether you love the person standing next to the stove making dinner with you. You just do not want to get burned.
That's a perfect analogy. The tragic dynamic, though, is that so few couples are actually educated about the hot stove.
Right, they have no idea.
So they attempt intimacy, it results in pain, and they fall into this devastating silent loop of shame and blame. The partner, who is totally unaware of the cellular reality of GSM, internalizes the rejection. They assume they are no longer attractive or that the romantic connection has just died.
Meanwhile, the woman feels entirely broken. She feels guilty for avoiding intimacy and inadequate, because her body is no longer responding the way it used to.
Yeah.
And so the emotional chasm widens right alongside the physical distance, which brings us right back to that opening survey, 73% pointing to menopause for their marital breakdown.
It's heartbreaking.
The gap in communication turns a biological symptom into a relationship fatality.
So the vital question becomes, how do we close that gap?
Right.
The clinical research points to a psychological framework known as common dyadic coping, championed by researcher Natalie Rosen.
Dyadic meaning the pair, the two of them.
Correct. Common dyadic coping demands a fundamental paradigm shift. Instead of treating the menopausal transition as a you problem, something happening to the woman that she must manage on her own while the partner just waits it out.
Right, the let me know when it's over approach.
Yeah, instead of that, it frames the transition as an us problem. It is a shared environmental stressor that the couple must navigate collaboratively.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Because the sources detail several specific shared approaches.
They do. First is actively seeking medical solutions together. For GSM, that often means exploring hormone replacement therapy, or HRT.
Right, but the sources differentiate between systemic HRT, like the patches or pills that deliver estrogen to the whole body, and localized estrogen.
Localized treatment is highly effective for GSM specifically. These are small doses of estrogen delivered via creams, rings, or pessaries directly into the vagina. It doesn't enter the bloodstream in significant amounts. It simply rehabilitates those specific epithelial cells, restoring the thickness, the glycogen production, and the elasticity over a few weeks.
And alongside localized estrogen, couples can utilize non-hormonal vaginal moisturizers, specifically those containing hyaluronic acid.
Yeah, that binds water to the tissues to keep them plump and reduce friction.
Right, so the dyadic coping aspect means researching these options together, attending the doctor's appointments as a unit, and discussing the applications openly without embarrassment.
It's a team effort.
And the sources also highlight toolkits from organizations like Relate, which provide structured communication frameworks.
Those frameworks are essential because they remove the emotional volatility from the conversation.
Like preventing the arguments before they start.
Exactly. The toolkits provide specific scripts, like using I statements rather than accusatory you statements, and setting scheduled times to check in about physical symptoms. This removes the pressure of trying to guess how the other person is feeling on any given day.
But I want to explore a potential downside to this team approach.
Okay.
Is there a scenario where a partner attempts to be, too involved, where their support actually backfires?
The data strongly validates that concern, actually. Rosen's research isolated a behavior called solicitous responding.
Solicitous responding, what does that mean?
This describes a partner who is overly attentive, constantly checking in on the pain, hovering, or relentlessly trying to fix the physical symptoms with, relentless positivity.
Oh, treating their partner like a fragile patient in a hospital ward.
Exactly, the dynamic.
Yeah.
And while it's well-intentioned, solicitous responses often exacerbate a woman's feelings of inadequacy.
Right, because it just highlights the problem.
It makes her hyper-focus on her own dysfunction and makes her feel like a burden to the relationship. Effective dyadic coping is not about overfunctioning or pity.
So what is it about?
It requires deep, active listening, validating the frustration of the transition, and tackling the problem without infantilizing the person experiencing it.
The sources also heavily emphasize that you cannot tackle the sexual dysfunction without first repairing the emotional baseline. Julia Samuel has a phenomenal concept in her writing. You can't get hot from cold.
That is such a crucial point.
Right. If you are living like distant, frustrated roommates, exchanging passive-aggressive sighs over the dishwasher, you are not going to suddenly transition into a thriving, passionate sex life just because you introduced a hyaluronic acid moisturizer.
No, you're really not. The emotional intimacy has to precede the physical intimacy. Couples have to intentionally rebuild a foundation of safety, which allows that hypervigilant threat system to power down.
And the clinical recommendation here is engaging in non-demanding touch.
Sensate focus, yes.
Meaning holding hands, cuddling on the couch, or giving a massage with the explicit agreed-upon boundary that it will not lead to intercourse.
Taking sex completely off the table removes the performance anxiety and the anticipation of pain.
Because the pressure is just gone.
Right. It allows the body to experience touch as pleasurable and safe again, rather than as a precursor to trauma.
And the sources suggest starting even simpler than that. The walk and talk. Getting out of the house, moving your body side by side.
That's a classic therapeutic technique.
It makes sense. Walking means you aren't forced to maintain intense, intimidating eye contact, across a formal dinner table. The physical movement helps regulate the nervous system, and the side-by-side orientation makes it easier to share vulnerable information.
Like how a new symptom is affecting your confidence.
Right, or how a specific interaction made you feel isolated. It really reestablishes the partnership.
It allows the relationship to adapt, because the fundamental truth of this transition is adaptation. The endocrine system adapts to the loss of estrogen. The mind must adapt to the new physical reality using self-compassion. And the relationship must adapt its communication and physical expectations to maintain intimacy.
So, to synthesize all of this for you listening, menopause is not a punchline. It is a profound neurological, biological, and relational transition. Your cellular matrix shifts, your collagen depletes, and the internal architecture of your body is rearranged.
But you possess immense agency in how that transition is experienced.
Exactly. By utilizing self-compassion to quiet the internal critic, deploying CBT techniques to break the feedback loop of the nervous system, and framing intimacy hurdles as a shared dyadic challenge rather than a personal failure, you can protect both your self-esteem and your partnership.
You do not have to be part of that 73%.
No, you really don't.
The data proves you have the tools to rewrite the experience. But I want to leave you with one final concept to consider, extrapolating from the research we've analyzed today.
Let's hear it.
We established that the suffering of menopause is largely dictated by the gap between our physical reality and our cultural expectations. The 2014 study proved that our internalized attitudes toward aging predict our distress more powerfully than our actual biology.
The narrative outweighs the scale.
Right. If we accept that the psychological narrative drives the physical distress, consider the generations coming up behind us. You're currently watching younger demographics radically destigmatize the human body.
That's true. They're very open.
They document their mental health, they openly discuss physiological realities, and they actively dismantle the filtered, flawless ideals of previous decades.
So where does that lead us?
Well, as those younger generations eventually reach midlife and the cultural expectation around aging becomes significantly more forgiving, will that collective shift in narrative actually change how the physical symptoms of menopause are experienced in the body?
Wow. If the overarching attitude changes, the brain's threat system might not activate as aggressively.
Exactly.
When the house gets rearranged, they might just shrug, learn the new layout, and refuse to panic in the dark. That is a brilliant thought to leave on. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.